Good morning and happy anniversary, right? Happy 10th anniversary. Uh, for my talk this morning, I have chosen to speak on the entire theme of the anniversary conference. The family, may not be able to sit anywhere. That works.
Okay, that's two.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Sorry, the computer is angled this way, I'm angled this way, but we make it work. Uh, so the family, traditions, transitions, and adaptations. Three big words. And I'm hoping to unpack them with you in these next few minutes. But I qualified that theme slightly based on my expertise and also based on my interests. And the way I redefined it essentially is to focus on the African immigrant family. I should confess also from the beginning that in this talk I raise more questions than I answer, and I am leaving it to the next keynote speaker and the next keynote speaker to answer all the questions. All right. I divide my lecture into 4 parts. The first part, I briefly define and discuss the family. In the second part, I review what we know in the literature about traditional African family. And in the third part, I examine the changes in the family in continental and transnational settings. Finally, I raise questions about the adaptations that have taken place in generational contexts. Now, I hope those at the very back can read the tiny print of the definitions. Otherwise, I'll still read them anyway. I should make one clarification right away. The African family in America has been changing since the era of slavery and post-emancipation. However, this conference focuses on the contemporary times and on the family among the more recent immigrants into the United States and other places, Canada, Britain, Europe. Also, it is important to acknowledge that the definitions of the family has not been static. I use the following 3 definitions to prove this point. First, the sociologist George P. Murdoch, in his 1948 book, Social Structure, defined the family as, quote, a social group characterized by common residence, economic cooperation, and reproduction, unquote. Second, the Oxford English Dictionary defines the family as, quote, a group consisting of 1 or 2 parents and their children, unquote. Third, the U.S. Health Resources and Services Administration defines the family as, quote, a group of 2 or more persons. Remember now, it just says 2 or more persons related by birth, marriage, or adoption who live together. Basically, anyone can be a family in the last definition. Each of these definitions calls attention to a central element in the form and functions of the family. However, when examined closely, they do not fully characterize the African family. Besides, African societies have their own words for the family. And some of the words I put there, if your ethnic group is not there, let me know. You let us know. Also, we'll put the word in. These are my friends, actually, that I contacted, from Senegal to South Africa to Kenya. So I didn't cover as much, okay? The values, several are listed on the screen. The value of the family may be observed in African languages and wise sayings. For instance, the Meru and the Kikuyu have the same word for family, which they call Andu, which translates as our people, which always means in the plural. The Wolof have a proverb which translates literally that if you have a large family, you have to lie on your back. What does that mean? In other words, you have to be in a position to accommodate everyone. Time will not permit me to go into all these wise sayings, but I think you get the point. I have to do a balancing act. While they vary from one ethnic group to another, anthropologists and sociologists have identified certain common features of the African family. First, the African family was and still is very large. Size determined everything, including wealth. Size was determined by polygamy and partly by the component parts of the extended family. The African extended family comprises the man, his wife or wives, their parents, their grandparents, if they are still alive, the married and unmarried children, the paternal and maternal uncles and aunts, and other associated people. Second, the traditional family lived together in a large homestead or compound, comprising several smaller households. The extended family could also be as large as one entire village. Thirdly, the family was held together by its leaders and by traditions. Many of us can remember some of those traditions. Family traditions are best observed around the holidays. Traditionally, those holidays are associated with religion. Examples include Christmas, Hanukkah, Easter, and if we go to Islam, Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adhan, and so on. African immigrant families look to these periods with great nostalgia. Those of us who grew up in Africa remember what those holidays were or used to be. And many of us, when we get to America or Europe or Canada, we try to recreate some of these things that we remember about our home country. But only we try. Other types of family traditions were naming ceremonies. You remember those? Initiation ceremonies, if you ever went through one. Wedding ceremonies, and elaborate funerals for those old men and women when they passed. Finally, everyone had a role in the traditional family. In particular, elders were involved in maintaining cohesion and preventing crisis, and in passing on the family tradition and history from one generation to another. The family was not just about the past, though. Elders and the family leaders were concerned also about the future. That's why they promote education and well-being of the younger members. To remain effective, therefore, and relevant in a world that is constantly changing, the elders, the parents must also be adaptable. And it's at this point that we look a little bit more about what has happened to the African family in this transition. The African family is dynamic, but more recently, the changes have been rapid and persistent, both on the continent and in the diaspora. Urbanization, modernization, education, rural-urban migration, all these have broken up the traditional families. It is difficult to find extended families that are still together today. While change has not been always for the better, no one could deny the necessity for the transitions. For the Africans in the diaspora, a key driver for change has been transnationalism. That's a big word, but I'll define it very quickly. Transnationalism has been defined as economic, political, and cultural processes that extend beyond the boundaries of the nation states. As Africans migrated across the great oceans, they become transnational in their person, in their thinking, and in their behavior. Several things have happened to the African family in transitional settings. These may be summed up in two words: contraction and expansion. These two words are contradictory. How can something be contracting and expanding at the same time? The family in the African diaspora has contracted. This is not the way we would have been if this were Africa. The nuclear family become more visible, comprising of the man, the wife. Remember, I didn't say the man, the wife, or wives. The man, the wife, and the children. That's all you get in the diaspora. The contraction was already occurring before migration. The great distance between the home country and the country of settlement multiplies that separation in transnational settings. I should add, however, that many do not maintain mental separation. Physical separation, yes, but mentally we're still connected. But in any case, the phone, WhatsApp, and other means of communication have helped to cushion that separation. At the same time, the family in transnational settings has been expanding. Let me explain what I mean by that. New arrivals swell the immigrant population in America or in Canada or in Europe. Temporarily, at least, they settle in the homes of some distant relatives and become new uncles and new aunties. Many immigrants file immigration papers for parents, a process which provides grannies for the children. The church has also become an important family where brothers and sisters in Christ replace missing blood brothers and sisters. These fictive relatives and godparents become a part of the extended family. Their relations, in turn, form part of the clan, the transnational clan. To take care of the new clan, and believe this or not, this is happening, to take care of the new clan, kings and chiefs are being installed in the diaspora. Anybody knows the king of their city there, here in Atlanta? That's a Yoruba king in Atlanta already. And I mean king, not some chief, but real king. It's in Riverdale, thank you. These transitions that I have mentioned earlier have formed the African immigrant families, they have forced the African immigrant families to adapt, to get into new cross-cultural relationships. Let me explain this. Some of you are familiar with this already. They have family friends from the host society. So your neighbor sometimes become your family friend. Or among other ethnic groups, some of the people who gave me the names of family in their ethnic group are our family friends. And among other countries' nationals. And children are often the first to make these transnational connections. They make them in schools, at sporting events, and at the playgrounds. And then the parents follow them when they are going to meet these new friends. The point of this is that the reach of the transnational African family has expanded. And we often call this social networks. You're already familiar with that term. And social networks give us social capital. Adaptations have come in different shapes and sizes. As demonstrated at the beginning of my lecture, the definition of the family and marriage in Western societies have shifted very far from the traditional patterns. I'm not opening that Pandora's box, as I mentioned. The transitions and adaptations I have so far explored underscore the importance of parenting in this fast-changing transnational context. Next thing I examine is adaptations of the African family through the generations. And you can help me with this because you are familiar with it. I'll give you a little bit of time to look at it and to find where you belong in the generational shift. Find where you belong. I know where I belong. In the interest of time, we should pick up the story from Generation X. That's not me, though. From Generation X. Often called the middle child generation because they are sandwiched between the boomers and the millennials. Members of Generation X are born between 1965 and 1980. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that there were more single-parent households when the Xers were growing up. So they grew up with fewer parental supervision than the boomers. They tend to be more liberal on social issues than the boomers, but they were sometimes described as slackers or whiners. Generation Y. Most are the children of the baby boomers. There are not many of them because the fertility rate in the Western societies was declining. Conversely, there are more of them who immigrated from the developing world, making them a diverse population. This is also why they are described as the first global generation. Some of us remember those who are in Generation Y who migrated to this country and will become part of Generation Y in this country, and you remember how that diversity helped the society. Now Generation Z in British English, Z in American English. Most are children of Gen Xers. They grew up with access to the internet. They have never known a period when there was no social media. Thus, they are described as digital natives or the NET, or Internet generation. Unfortunately, many of them are coming of age in the period of COVID-19 pandemic. They are regarded as the most diverse generation. Now I go to the millennials. Most are children, to Generation Alpha. Most are children of millennials. The term is usually credited to Mark Crindle, a generational researcher based in Australia. According to Mark Crindle, within 4 years, this generation will outnumber the baby boomers, and many of them will live to see the next century. So that's important to remember. This is the generation that is going to take the world across the century, just like some of us did crossing into the Y2K. Remember that Y2K? Yeah. We see some time ago we found the water that we bought and kept in the basement. We thought the world was going to end. Yeah. As can be observed from this grid, the length of years for each generation varied, but they became fixed at 15-year intervals as we get closer to the present. The reason for that is technology. Technological changes make things change much faster. Of course, as immigrants, we have a different and more complicated relationship with generational studies. Immigrants have another set of generational sequence with its own set of characteristics, which must be grafted into the host society's generational sequencing. Now, I ask you to look at the board and see where you are in this generational sequence, but maybe you feel more comfortable looking at where you are with this other generational sequence. I think I pushed too high. All right, this one. So take a look closely. Immigrant societies have a different generational sequence, and this is immigrant sequencing. Those Africans who arrived in the West in the 1960s, whether they were voluntary migrants or refugees, were considered the first generation of the new African diaspora. Many would eventually be naturalized citizens. Their children who were born in the West are categorized as the second generation. The children of the second generation formed the third generation. So unlike the Western generational categories where you have a fixed amount of years, in the immigrant generational study, there is no fixed time because everything depended on when a person set foot on the soil of the West. Specific to the United States, the immigrant generations may be categorized as follows. First generation, a foreign-born citizen of the United States. Some of us are way old, some of us are way young, but if you are the first generation, you are the first generation. And then there's 1.5 generation. These are people who immigrated to the United States when they were young, like when they are in their teens. They may also be seen as the DACA or the neo-DACA or the post-DACA generation. There's another term that I should graft into this, which I decided not to put on the screen, and that's the anchor babies. That's also part of this consideration that you have to remember. They are born here, they are American, they are not first generation, they are natural born. But they are raised abroad. And there's going to come a time when they return. And when they return, they are not too clear about life in America. Just like every immigrant, they will have to begin their journey. The second generation are the children of the first generation or the children of the 1.5 generation born in the United States. In short, US-born children of foreign-born parents. And then there is the 2.5 generation. These are people with one native-born and one foreign-born parent. Someone like President Barack Obama would be 2.5 generation. And then there is the third generation and higher. That is people who are native-born, who have two native-born parents. Essentially, we as immigrant parents and children and adults, we have to work with the Western generational study and this other. We're not sandwiched. We are fully part of the one and fully part of the other. We cannot escape from one to the other. There are guidelines for crossing from one to the other. So, going by the understanding that one generation raises the next, it is easy to see the challenges facing parents when the first generation raises the second generation in an entirely different cultural and generational milieu in the West. The question is worth repeating. What happens when one was born abroad and now raises children of a different generational culture? 10 years ago, the founder of PRI recognized these problems and chose to do something about them. Since its founding, PRI has organized several workshops and training for parents and youth. The workshops were designed to fortify children who must live and thrive in these confusing dual and triple multi-generational environments. As I noted before, even the pandemic did not stop the PRI. Instead, the PRI found ways to take the workshop to remote platforms, and God blessed the efforts by reaching a wider audience. One of the concerns addressed constantly by PRI was how families that only occasionally use the internet might effectively parent children who go online at a very young age. Among the concerns were safety, privacy, marketing, ethics, and cyberbullying. PRI has organized workshops on various topics like how to protect children and young adults and how to raise responsible, godly children. PRI has been timely, it has been relevant, it has been forward-looking. The trainers and the volunteers deserve our applause and our appreciation. Happy 10th anniversary. Let me now bring this to a close. How can we promote goodness in our families? What values are essential for the future of our communities? And by that I mean the African diaspora communities, which will also promote goodness in the larger community. I believe the breakout groups and networking events will provide answers to these questions. Dr. Chinwe Williams and Dr. Kemi Akindele are counselors. They and other experts are here to coach, encourage, and provide spiritual guidance. From time immemorial, one generation has been responsible for raising the next generation. One challenge is for the Generation Z to not drop the ball in racing Generation Alpha. Also, another challenge is for the first generation of African immigrants to not drop the ball in raising the second generation. So I challenge parents, grandparents, uncles, and aunties, and others in the African diaspora communities to raise the next generation in ways that uphold the values that their communities consider sacred and non-negotiable. Yet again, I call for mentors to step up and help guide our youth and the younger generation coming behind them. Finally, my challenge to all of us is to support PRI with human and material resources to achieve its mission. Thank you very much.